Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project SERAP has urged President Muhammadu Buhari to urgently direct the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami SAN and appropriate law enforcement agencies to identify and arrest the perpetrators and sponsors of attacks on the offices of the Independent National Electoral Commission INEC across the country. SERAP urged Buhari to ensure that the perpetrators and their sponsors are named and shamed and promptly brought to justice, regardless of their political affiliations. SERAP's Deputy Director Kolawole Oluwadare, in a letter dated November 12, 2022, said these attacks are increasingly putting INEC under siege, and if not urgently addressed, the escalating attacks on the offices of INEC would impair the people's right to vote. Well, joining us to discuss this is Kolawole Oluwadare. He's the Deputy Director, SERAP, and Elvis Asia, he's also a legal practitioner. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Oluwadare, because, of course, SERAP is at the front and center of this issue. Now, 65,699 PVCs have been sabotaged. And this obviously is a huge number for voters. And this is not the first time that we're hearing about these kinds of attacks on INEC offices. I mean, we can go as far back as 2020. We saw fire incidences. We saw these many attacks. And now we're getting ready for 2023. And then this. Why do you think that there are these repeated attacks, and to what end?
Thank you very much. It should be very hard to decipher the motive of those who are carrying out these attacks, but the effects are obvious. So while we can guess what will be the motive for this kind of attacks, at least until the police make arrest and investigate, we can analyze what the effects will be, which is why we need to move to stop this very urgently. These are the effect of preventing what should be a free and fair elections, given the various doubts and various uncertainties that we witness in Nigeria, insecurity, unemployment, and a lot of things, including those who have suggested that INEC may not be in a position to carry out its strategic duties. It's very important that we stop this attack. He has the capacity of he has the ability of limiting the capacity of INEC, if ever there was a capacity, to carry out these elections effectively, and then to discourage voters from voting, given the incidences of the uprise in voter apathy that we've seen. And really, the registrations this time around is encouraging. So everything must be done to ensure that nothing stops this election from voting, and to encourage and boost the capacity of INEC to deliver these elections successfully.
We're looking specifically at, some of the issues that, we need to draw attention of Nigerians to. Number one, the burning of these INEC offices and the materials has no compensatory benefit to the perpetrators of the heinous crime. Therefore, it is purely a sabotage against the nation and her future. That's one. Secondly, most of these newly, registered voters who showed up with so much enthusiasm, we all saw how people trooped out there, almost breaking the necks of the workers at INEC offices across the country to get their PVCs. Some of them are still waiting to collect those PVCs, and now they have nothing. Again, looking at the time that we have, INEC just published its voters register. How much time do we have for us to reprint these voters' cards and one way or the other make sure that people are not disenfranchised? I mean, is that even workable? Because some would say, well, there's time before January. But really, do we have what it takes? Plus, don't forget, this also means that INEC will have to go above its budget, a budget that they struggled and fought so hard to get.
These questions raises those very important issues that underscore this kind of advocacy targeted at the president, which is in favor of the Nigerian populace, really, not INEC, as it were, but Nigerian voters and ultimately citizens of Nigeria who would bear the outcome of whatever the election speaks in 2023. I believe there is time for INEC to do this, but much more importantly, INEC must be proactive and in disclosing information to the people, not just making assurances, as it were, but also following that with action. So over 6,000 PVCs have been destroyed. INEC should be able to tell Nigerians which plans they have to make sure that these people are not disenfranchised due to no fault of theirs, by the way, and that these PVCs are able to be printed and collected. But aside from that, what of those that are even elected, that are registered, as it were? Within the timeline that we have, can INEC deliver these PVCs? Can we boost the numbers of those who would collect the PVCs, ultimately translating to those who would vote on election day? These are very important questions that INEC must answer, and not in private, really. INEC must be forthcoming with information, along with the reassurances, followed up by action, that it is able to ensure that those whose PVCs have been, those who have registered are able to get their PVCs, and those who, by this act, we cannot call it an act of God. This is certainly an act of man. Those who have witnessed this, whose PVCs have been destroyed, are able to get their PVCs and able to vote. Really, I think INEC has these very important questions to answer. And the president, being the commander-in-chief and ultimately the one that the INEC chairman answers to, should be able to do everything possible to ensure that the INEC delivers on its statutory mandate.
Elvis, over to you. The Obi Dati campaign and media organization spoke about the fact that those waiting to collect their PVCs are in millions. And if this ugly trend is not checked, they're saying that Nigeria will have many voters disenfranchised, and we're talking about millions. And they also said that there's a potent danger now if this level of disenfranchisement occurs, and they're saying that the results of next year's election will not reflect the wishes of, you know, the overwhelming majority of Nigerians. But looking at the government of the day, do you see a concerted effort, a willingness, a body language that to check this situation, to even address what INEC needs to, one way or the other, give these disenfranchised Nigerians an opportunity at the polls come 2023? And just like every other thing that we see and how government, you know, reacts to them, might this be swept under the carpet, or should we be hoping that government will take this on as something that, you know, they would want to leave as a legacy of sorts?
Unfortunately, looking at the trajectory of this present administration, one would not really share much confidence in the ability of the government to really come to task in terms of first addressing the fundamental issues of security, which is really the problem. If you go around this country, you see INEC offices. They are all like shanties. You know, there isn't much proper securities. A lot of these sensitive materials are stored in local government secretariats, in places not properly secured. You know, the government hasn't demonstrated the fact that, you know, elections are very important in this country, and the fact that, you know, we should commit resources, you know, as much as we can towards securing, you know, INEC offices and staff. So I would say that government hasn't really demonstrated so much, you know, capacity in terms of addressing these issues. We haven't seen people arrested. We haven't seen prosecution, you know, of people who, you know, on the frolic just go ahead, go about destroying INEC materials and offices. This has been happening for years. And so one would, you know, again, be very cautious in expressing hope and optimism. But again, as Nigerians, we have no choice but to continue to hope and let's continue to pray that the government, you know, come to terms with the reality that, you know, this time around we have to get it right, because, you know, like my colleague said earlier, these attacks are seriously undermining the electoral process. You know, apart from the undermining capacity of INEC to conduct the elections, it's also going to, you know, scare people away from the electoral process, you know, and then, you know, give the impression that there isn't much confidence in the electoral process, which will affect, you know, voters' turnout and all other associated issues that comes with that. So, you know, this government hasn't demonstrated much capacity in terms of trying to secure our electoral process. We really hope that, you know, this should be a wake-up call. We still have time. If we really want to fix the problem, we should be able to fix it. Government should ensure that these materials are stored in very secure places. More security personnel should be deployed to INEC offices. We can't continue to have shanties. You know, can't continue to store INEC materials in places that, you know, really you can't. I mean, just imagine the way people go in and out to bomb these places without any resistance.
Okay. Let's talk more about who should take this more seriously? I mean, thank goodness, SERAP, I said something earlier before we started the show. SERAP seems to always be making calls on the federal government, calls on political parties, calls on INEC. But who should be taking this more seriously? Who should be making this front and center for them? Is it the political parties? Is it the federal government? Is it INEC? And who's also going to benefit if federal government doesn't live up to expectation? Like you have said, that half the time, government does not necessarily, live up to expectation. But who would benefit at the end of the day if this is not done?
Well, of course, we know who will benefit. Those who are championing this are obviously politicians who are looking for ways to score to the process, who are looking for ways to disenfranchise Nigerians. As we have seen in the last couple of months, there has been, serious movement by the youth, to try to mobilize for this election. And this attempt to, prevent people from collecting their PVCs obviously means one thing, which is that politicians who are afraid of a free and fair process, who are afraid of a mass participation in that process, are hell-bent on trying to score through this process. So definitely Nigerians won't be benefiting from this. Definitely the people who, even the individuals or the persons that went to burn the offices obviously have no personal gain to get from this. It has to be somebody, it has to be politicians. It has to be people with vested interest in the electoral process. These are people that will benefit from this process. And, and sometimes one will be tempted to say that some people in government may also benefit, because how else would you explain the, almost lack of, attempt at trying to prevent situations like this? By now, one would have thought that, we'll have a special unit in all security agencies dedicated specifically for this purpose. You have, like you rightly said, apart from SERAP and a few other, and the Be Dirty organization, very few politicians have come up to really talk about this. When I was growing up as a child, we used to have the National Orientation Agency that was involved in information dissemination across the country. We used to see billboards, we used to see jingles on television, on radio. We don't see that anymore. Government is not really interested. And so, and that lack of interest can only say one thing, and you won't blame anybody if anybody comes to say that, look, perhaps those in government have something to benefit from this. But definitely Nigerians do not have anything to benefit from this. And we have no choice but to prevail on government at all levels to, ensure that, they do their duties and secure our electoral process, so that, our youth who have now come up, who appears to be coming of age, who appears to be now interested in that process, are given a fair chance to participate in the process and to choose who their leaders will be in the next coming elections.
Okay. Back to you, Kolawole. You are asking the federal government to bring these perpetrators to book. How do they go about it? Again, Elvis just said something about prevailing on government to make sure that, justice is done and people have a right to vote, show up and vote. How do we go about it? I'm asking because the last time Nigerians decided to stand up for themselves, you and I know what happened. But then this is election season and everything seems to be pretty sensitive around the country. Where do we even start?
Sorry, I was about to ask you when was the last time Nigeria stood up for anything, but maybe we can talk about that later. So you asked who should be responsible for this? Of course, the federal government. And of course, the president. The buck stops at his table. He's not called commander-in-chief for fun. He has both the statutory powers and the statutory duties to do this. The INEC chairman answers to him. Everything, morality, legality, everything speaks to the president taking action in this regard. And it's very simple. The laws are well clear. The oath of office he took is clear. The powers of the president in the constitution is very clear. He should instruct these law enforcement agencies to ensure that there is a thorough investigation and the arrest of those who have done this. But more than that, while not dwelling too much on what the problem is, there needs to be political will at the highest level to ensure that this doesn't go on. Really, we cannot continue this every election cycle. This is something we know happens all the time. We should add 4 years at the least to plan for this, to ensure that there is adequate security in logistics, even logistics of ensuring that these sensitive INEC materials are well kept and protected. So, but there is still time, but I suspect that may not be enough. But at the minimum, the president should be able to take that step to ensure that the law enforcement agencies, who answer to him, by the way, take adequate steps to investigate, find those who are perpetrators of this act, ensure that they face justice. And much more importantly, they should take proactive measures to protect INEC facilities, the materials, and even INEC staff. Really, that's very important, that these individuals, who are Nigerians also, by the way, who are who work in INEC, who are part and parcel of this process, election process, have that assurance that they are safe and they can do their job freely. Without that assurance, the voters have no assurance they'll be able to vote, that they won't be able to to observe their right on election day. So really, the president should be able to take the steps. And really, the police, being the easiest one to mention, is at the forefront of this. But more importantly, Marianne, political will must be demonstrated by the president to ensure that really INEC is able to deliver its mandate.
Finally, Elvis, is there any such thing as political will in this country, especially if it's not to the benefit of politicians?
Well, you said it all. I mean, when it benefits them, you see a lot of political will. In fact, we have seen instances where they move as if they're a hurricane, but obviously when it benefits them. And so when they are not moving, yes, that simply means that the lack of political will is deliberate, because government has the capacity, government has the force, government has all security agencies behind it, government has intelligence, government has the capacity to prosecute. We have the Office of the Attorney General, who is supposed, for example, to have a special desk for cases like this, and all of that. So if that is not happening, if there's sheer lack of political will in order to rein in these criminals who wants to undermine the electoral process, then it will be a deliberate lack of political will.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you. Kolawole Luwadare is the Deputy Director, SERAP, and Elvis Asia is a legal practitioner. Well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed and see what develops from that story. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight on Plus Politics. But before I go, I would like to give you my take. Here's my take. Progress as a concept is something only attainable through the perpetual forward motion of a country and its people. The lessons of a day's experience are dwarfed by the lessons of a year and decades worth of experiences. As the 63-year-old independent nation that we are, Nigeria has had enough time to lessen a great many lessons on how to improve our society. One thing even the youths have learned in their relatively short time is that our issues are largely born of a failure in leadership. Certainly, as individuals, we all have a role to play in making our country great again. That's if we can even say that we've ever been great in the first place. So, as we look forward to the coming general election, it bears asking, why does every forward step taken in pursuit of progress always seem so easily thwarted by opposing steps of those intent to keep us in place? No matter where you stand on the prospect of, new electronic voting system being the game changer to us, finally having free, fair and credible elections, hearing that INEC offices are being broken into and PVC cards, being destroyed can only serve to sink that expectation that you have, thought of yourselves to, bring us a good Nigeria. So we all must have a joint and concerted efforts to bring our governments to make sure that we are seriously protected, and not just us, but our votes are also protected. I am Mary Annika, thanking you for watching. Have a good night.